On this episode of Vintage New York, we take a little road trip north of the city to the famous Vintage Emporium warehouse in Newburgh. Then I'll give you a little geography lesson and explain what really constitutes Upstate New York. And of course, I'll show you what I bought at the Vintage Emporium and how I styled it. I'm Sydney Stone. I'm the editor of Vintage Fashion Magazine, and this is Vintage New York. There are actually two locations of Vintage Emporium in Newburgh. I went to the larger location, which is the warehouse, and let me tell you, it's absolute heaven. First of all, this place is gigantic, and it's filled with everything vintage you can possibly think of, from clothes to furniture, books, magazines, accessories, and everything in between. There are over 75 vendor spaces, and each one has its own individual style. Walking up and down these aisles is like taking a step back in history, and it's pure joy. In fact, I was so overcome with emotion when I turned a corner and spotted my childhood dollhouse that I cried. The lovely people that work here treat you like family. I even told them when I was checking out that this was my new happy place. To say it's worth the drive up from Manhattan is an understatement. Vintage Emporium is vintage Mecca. And I'll show you what I bought here and how I styled it at the end of this video. So is Newburgh considered upstate? And what actually constitutes upstate New York? When most people think of New York, they think of Manhattan. And for people who live in Manhattan, anything north of Yankee Stadium is upstate. This is a great map of New York highlighted by region, so I'm going to use it to break it all down. First, we have the city and Long Island, which would be considered the southernmost New York. Next, we have the lower Hudson Valley. I actually own a house here, and it's only 20 minutes away from the Newburgh Vintage Emporium, which comes in handy. Further up, we have Albany in the Capital Region, which is considered central New York. And I would say anything above central New York is considered upstate. And now that our little geography lesson is over, let's see what I got at the Emporium. In addition to the cool clutch bag I showed you earlier, I also purchased this 1960s polyester crepe dress with these stunning pleated sleeves. I styled it with an Aldo beaded necklace, a pair of Christian Louboutin platform pumps, and a beautiful 1950s suede bag, also purchased at Vintage Emporium. And that's it for this episode of Vintage New York. Join me next time as I go vintage shopping in the West Village, and I'll also tell you all about the history of the South Street Seaport. I'll even show you the exact spot where I fell in love with New York and decided to move here back in 1999. Be sure to hit the subscribe button below to be notified when the next episode drops, and visit vintagefashionmagazine.com for more vintage content.